Okay, so we're going to talk about the forthcoming fight on the 29th of April. Anthony Joshua at Wembley against Vladimir Klitschko. Eagerly anticipated fight. We're all buzzing for this fight. I think it's going to be an absolute cracker, to be honest. I think it's going to be a much better show than the Klitschko that turned up against Tyson Fury, for several different reasons. I don't think Klitschko was really up for the fight against Fury. We all saw what happened there. He hardly threw a punch throughout the fight. Having said that, I think Fury was, he was so pumped up. This was his chance. This was the fight. This was the one that was going to make him. And his style of fighting, which, if you recall, was it was almost unpredictable what he was going to do. They were very, very jerky, on edge. He just looked like a guy that was totally on edge and was ready to explode. And I think prior to the fight, he totally got inside of Klitschko's head as well with the antics outside the ring. This is a very different prospect we've got now. We've got Anthony Joshua. For me, I predicted the very first time I saw Anthony Joshua that he was going to be world champion and probably the next biggest thing since Mike Tyson. Some people might argue that Lennox Lewis and other people have been equally as successful. But for me, as a boxing fan, I don't think I've ever been more excited about a fighter than I was the very first time I saw Mike Tyson, which was way before he was world champion. And he was still a child, but in an absolute adult body with a ferociousness that I have never ever seen anyone before. Let's remember as well about Tyson. I think a lot of people overlook this. His speed for a heavyweight was incredible. I'm talking about Mike Tyson. His speed for a heavyweight was absolutely incredible. He could throw combinations and jabs and little short. It was the inside uppercut that did a lot of damage to people and knocked a lot of people out, opened them up. He would get them with a hook into the rib cage, and follow that straight up with an uppercut straight through the guard, rocking the head back. And then, obviously, once they were opened up, he just unloaded with a barrage of bombs. But anyway, getting back to the Saturday the 29th at Wembley, we've got Anthony Joshua, heir apparent to the throne. I say that tongue-in-cheek because, he is the world champion, a world champion, and Klitschko isn't. But what we've got here is a meeting of youth, hunger, undoubted strength, and skill, but relatively untested. It has to be said, relatively untested, against someone who's at the twilight of his career, you could say. But he's been there, he's done it, He was a world champion for such a long time, but in a period where there wasn't many great heavyweights out there. So to stay world champion, I think was probably easier than it may have been in the period before. Not taking nothing away from Klitschko, to be the top of your tree, to become a unified world champion, and to hold on to that title for the length of time that he did, that's not to be sniffed at. So on Saturday the 29th, this is how I see the fight going. I think the early rounds, round one in particular, I think you're going to see Joshua just trying to feel out Klitschko. He's going to be trying to want to work out what what his game plan is, what he's going to do. Now, if it all goes to plan, I'm guessing for Anthony Joshua, round 2, 3, 4, when he starts to settle into the fight, starts to feel his jab, find his jab, land his jab if he can, work out the space, and start to land jabs with power, that's going to be his opportunity to see how much damage he can do to Klitschko, whether he's going to be effective against Klitschko. If he is effective against Klitschko, and Klitschko starts to show that he's, that he's troubled by the jab, troubled by his power, and I suspect, although they're pretty equal in size, weight, statistics, bodily statistics, I predict Klitschko will have vastly underestimated Joshua's power in the punches. A bit like people underestimated Frank Bruno back in the day. We all know the story of Frank Bruno. Very similar in build, very similar in structure. A great punch. Unfortunately, he didn't have the ability, his chin didn't have the ability to withstand a lot of punishment. So, when he was in fights, he could be a long way ahead. But if he didn't finish them off early in the fight, the writing was on the wall. And he came unstuck. James Bone Crusher Smith, I think, was the first one. And I recall seeing on the fights that he lost, once that right hand or the left hand landed on his chin, it was as if the tree had fallen. It was as if everything from the neck down just went like that. His arms went down. Although he wasn't on the ground, he was pretty much out on his feet, and it was just a case of laying into him, pounding into him, and he slowly collapsed down. Take nothing away from Frank. I loved him. He was fantastic. And he put up a very credible fight. He was the first person to hurt Mike Tyson, it has to be said. And in different circumstances, maybe, if he hadn't, I think he panicked a little bit, didn't expect to hurt him, to be fair. And he didn't seize that moment. He stepped back. But by the time he had realised and stepped back in, Tyson had recovered. And we all know the rest of that story. So I think, so the early part of the fight, I think this is what we're going to see. And I think it's going to be very, very telling. If we get to round 4 and Joshua is comfortably ahead and in control of the fight, I think you might see a stoppage in round 6 or 7. Now, Klitschko, let's not underestimate this guy. He too has got one hell of a punch on him. He's got the experience of many fights, world title fights. Many people came to try and take his belt and failed. And the reason they failed was because they underestimated him. I always thought, looking at him, he looked a very robotic, stand up straight kind of fighter. But he's got something there, and I think his experience. So I'm now going to put the boot on the other foot. If in those early rounds, I think you will also have a very different Klitschko to what you saw against Tyson Fury, and I think Klitschko will come out to prove a point in the UK to the UK fans. Taking into account what happened against Tyson Fury, that. He's not over the hill. He's not washed up. And I think he's going to try and land quite early. And I think he's going to try and land power shots quite early. And I think this is what Anthony Joshua has got to be aware of. Although you're going to try and feel him out with your own jab, it's going to be very difficult for him because Klitschko is a power hitter, And if he hits Anthony Joshua early on, and hurts Anthony Joshua earlier on, I think Klitschko's got the experience and the knowledge of how to win a fight, and I think we could have possibly the outcome that we don't want. Either way, I don't see this fight going past round 7 either way. I think if it's in Joshua's favour, it will actually be a knockout. He will put him down. Not necessarily knock him unconscious, but I think he'll put him down and he'll be counted out, maybe on his knee, and doesn't want any more. I think if it's the other way around, I think if it's in Klitschko's favour, I think if the knockout comes, it will be quite early, possibly round 2 or 3, because of Joshua won't have accounted for his skill, his speed, his experience, and his power. And I think that would possibly be a stoppage, not a knockout, maybe a count out, referee stopping it. I might be totally wrong, hope I am. My actual prediction for the fight, if you want to put me on the spot, who's going to win on Saturday the 29th? If I had to put money on it, I'm going for Anthony Joshua round 6. Knockout. Hope you enjoyed this. Please subscribe to my channel. If I get enough likes on this, I'll do a lot more of these for other forthcoming fights as well. Thanks very much for listening and watching. Take care.